Hello, ladies and gentlemen. My name is TB Skyn, and we're going to talk about animation again today. League of Legends recently released the music video for the theme to the World Championships Legends Never Die by Against the Current. And there are a few interesting things going on in this video that I would like to talk about, specifically the mingling and, in some cases, the clash of two very different approaches to animation, which is 3D and stop motion, and that's what we're going to be focusing on here today. We're going to be talking a little bit about some of the techniques that the short uses in order to get its aesthetic across. We're going to talk a little bit about some of the things it does right, some of the things it does very, very right, and some of the things I feel like don't quite work. So let's start with the positives. The basics of the video is that we have opening scene on a pro player as they're getting ready to walk into the stadium and play for the World Championships. Then we have an escalating series of scenes with a curious progression of time with Ashe and Lee Sin and Garen all undergoing their own sort of trial of spirit, going through some training, getting stronger, overcoming a challenge. And then we bookended on the pro player finally walking into the stadium, getting ready to fight for his career or fight for the World Championship. The basic storytelling thrust of the thing is that it is drawing a parallel between the struggles of the pro player in the real world to win an esports championship and the fictional struggles of the characters in the game as they try to do right by their worlds, as they train and struggle and fight in order to save the world, save a village, save themselves, or whatever the case may be. From a storytelling perspective, this short is extremely well executed. We open on quiet moments. We have the pro player facing off against the arena, sort of steeling himself for the conflict to come. We have Ashe just walking up a hill with a kill and sort of facing the challenge that is before her, which is to save the inhabitants of this village that is being attacked by unknown assailants. Then we have Lee Sin quietly meditating in a temple as assassins of some kind approach him and are about to kill him. And then we have Garen leading some Demacians, one assume, into battle, facing down the enemy, looking over his shoulder, up against impossible odds. So we have every character in the short at this point are up against impossible odds that they must overcome in order to, fulfill their dream or their destiny or whatever. And then we cut into training montages with Garen going through some sword sparring with big burly sword man here, who's teaching him how to sort things, and Ashe going through hunting, like learning to hunt, apparently trying to figure out how to kill this frickin' deer so she can eat some food, and Lee Sin doing martial arts stuff on giant pillar and falling down because he's blind, the idiot. And these three scenes all progress at pretty much a similar rate, where we see the characters learning, overcoming, understanding, getting better, struggling against impossible odds, and then eventually all three of their narratives conclude with Lee Sin here having apparently mastered his kata, Ashe binding the wound on her hand and getting up to walk off to chase the deer some more, and Garen being able to move this big-ass motherfucking statue. And I just want to comment on, this is a legit CrossFit regimen. I'm just saying, if he can move that, Jesus Christ, you do not want to get punched by this guy. Riot should really buff its damage just because of this short. The dude must be buff as hell. And then we get the moment of transcendence, where they learn, where they overcome, where they do the thing, finally overcoming, heading into the actual challenge, which for Lee Sin is the fight with the assassins. For Ashe, it is the fight with the people attacking the village that she's trying to protect. And for Garen, it is facing down the charging army of the enemy, presumably Noxus, one imagines. And then the last little clever bit of sleight of hand that the short does is at the end of Garen's part of the narrative, where he has beaten off the initial attack, and now he's standing up against impossible odds, facing down a literal horde of people in front of him, and striding forward confidently. And then we cut to the pro player, who is also striding forth confidently against a literal horde of other people, facing up against impossible odds. So the storytelling, the visual storytelling aspect of this short is brilliant. It's excellently executed. The scripting, because think about what this thing is trying to manage here, what it's trying to do. It has, in total, 4 separate storylines that are connected by a theme, and it has to explore all of these storylines in a way that resolves in a to a satisfying manner. That is really freaking hard to do. I invite you to try and script that shit out on your own. Much less storyboarded, much less put together a visual aesthetic for it. Which leads us on to, from all this praise, well, let's have a little bit more praise for it, because we're going to talk about the visuals, and I have a few different notes. Now, when we are in the real world, when we are in our universe, the light is synthetic. That is to say, it is neon light. It is full of lens flares and glow and sort of distortions in the light of the kind that we associate with modern synthetic light bulbs and lights and city lights. When we are in the narratives of the story, the light is much more naturalistic. All of the light seems like it's coming from natural light sources, be it the sun or be it the reflections of the moon on the snow, or indeed the fire going on, or the late day sun that permeates both Lee Sin and Garen's parts of the short, or indeed the sort of the very flat kind of pastel colors. Something you'll notice is that in all of the shorts involving the lead characters, the colors are they're there. It's not like it's colorless, but the colors are not super saturated. They're not super strong. They are always just kind of a little bit muted. With the one exception being finally in the end scenes is when the light really comes out. And when they really start to play with light, you can see the power of the colors is ramped up, which is another brilliant storytelling aspect, that as we open on our characters, the light tends to be the light and the color tends to be a little bit dull, a little bit muted, kind of like the characters themselves who have not reached their full potential. And then once we get to the climactic fight scene between Lee Sin and his assailant, I had something in my mouth there, I don't know what it was. Once we get to the climactic fight scene, look how much the light has ramped up. Like, all of a sudden, you've got light beams and hard shadows, and everything is in stark relief, and everything is much more saturated and powerful. And the same thing goes for Ash. While she is in this winter landscape where you kind of can't do that much with color, they've done a clever thing where in the early parts of her story, she doesn't have the magic ice bow. But now that she has it, it becomes this huge flash of color in her otherwise dull and gray world. And it is also responsible for the primary flash of color in her part of the narrative, which is when she fires what one imagines must be the enchanted crystal arrow, which now apparently penetrates enemies. I did not know it could do this. And in Garen's case, it is the bright, warm sunlight of the fields of battle that has ramped up intensity to like 1,000 at this point, especially visible in this shot here. You can see that bright, searing orange just going on all over the place. So there is this escalation not only in the characters finding their feet, increasing their powers, becoming stronger, but also in the way that the colors of the thing are presented. It becomes more and more vivid, more and more powerful as the characters get stronger, ending with Garen being completely enveloped in this extremely powerful bright sunlight, which then transitions us out, which again is a lovely piece of visual connective tissue. And there's also a lovely bit of color grading and difference. When you have these 3 storylines intercutting with each other that you need to keep separate, what you cannot have happen is that you cut from one to the other and then your audience gets confused and goes, wait, but where's the other character that we were just looking at? Surely she is still there. For instance, let's see, when we cut from Ash's face here to Lee Sin there, the audience should not be thinking, oh, they are in the same place or at the same time, or the Lee Sin character somehow relates to the Ash character. And when we cut from Lee Sin to Garen, we should also not feel like, oh, wait, is Garen then the leader of the guys that are stalking the monk dude who's sitting here? You have to separate it very strongly. And the primary way that this short does that is with color. Most obviously, Ash, because she's in a nighttime winter landscape, it's all grays and blues and, you know, dark shades and lots of browns. Not very powerful browns, mostly blues, to be honest. Whereas with Lee Sin, we've got much more of a pinkish very sort of warm reddish light going on. And a lot of reds taking their cue from the color of his headband and the cloth wrapped around his arms. Whereas with Garen, it is a much more sort of pastelic golden light that he's bathed in. Pastelic. I'm not sure that's a word. But for Lee Sin, let's see if I can find it. The color, yeah, this shot very well exemplifies this color right here. All of that symbolizes the connection to Lee Sin and symbolizes the distinction from Lee Sin's part of the story to every other character's part of the story. The same thing goes for Ashe. Here, all the colors here symbolize that we are in Ashe's world, we're in the Freljord, we are not in any of the other characters' worlds right now. And for Garen, it's this golden light kind of aesthetic that is slightly similar to Lee Sin's, but because Lee Sin has that powerful pink motif going on with all the petals and the powerful reds, he's distinct from that as well. So you get this wonderful separation where Garen in particular is much more focused towards the yellows and the oranges, which is just, from a storytelling perspective, excellent. So what is my criticism? Well, the animation style. We're going to linger on this shot just for a second because there is a couple of things going on here. First of all, when you get an initial look of this shot, if you don't look too closely, it could be a photograph of snow, right? Like, it's very realistically rendered. It looks very real, but there's something odd going on with the camera because everything around the edges seems to be blurred. Almost as though it's a tilt-shifting camera. Almost as though it's a camera that's meant to zoom in and film something which is in reality quite small. Like, for instance, puppets. So let's have a look at Ashe's foot as it comes into view. I'm going to forward and go back by single frames of the animation, right? This is one frame, this is the next frame. Look how her foot moves. There's no motion blurring. There is no, well, pretty much anything. It just teleports from place to place when you slow it down frame by frame, which, if this was footage, real footage of a real thing, you would expect that in the motion there would be some blurring or some artifacting or something, but this looks like a series of still photos, and this is absolutely intentional. Now, I do not believe that this is actually stop-motion animation. I would be surprised if it was, just because of all this other stuff that's going on. I'm going to go so far as to say as I'm sure that this is 3D animated. I'll be very surprised if I'm wrong. But it is 3D animated in a way which is very, very, very deliberately, very intentionally meant to evoke stop-motion animation. So why would you do that when you have the full capacities and powers of 3D animation, which Riot have been so damn good at putting to use in so many other cases? Why then would you go and emulate stop motion, which is in a lot of ways worse because you can't do animation as smoothly? Well, stop motion animation is a unique discipline in animation that I love very, very much. And one of the advantages it has over all other animation styles is that it is photographs of real objects. That's what makes up a stop motion animation. It is real physical objects in the world that are being lit with real physical lights, under the control of the director, of course, and the cinematographer, but they are real objects, and therefore they have a kind of presence and a kind of texture and a weight and a reality to them that other styles of animation are really hard-pressed to match. And when you think about something like, for instance, The Nightmare Before Christmas, which is probably the most famous one, but also the works of Studio Laika, who did animations like Coraline, or indeed Kubo and the Two Strings, and I think Box Trolls and Paranorman are also theirs, where people regularly confuse it for 3D animation because it's so gorgeous and smooth, but they have this very unique, very physical aesthetic that 3D animation on some levels just cannot match. And that's what they're trying to go for here. They're trying, I think, to approach that very special, very real feeling physicality that you get with stop-motion animation, which can be very hard to replicate otherwise. And that's where I think things start to fall apart, at least for me. This is going to be a very personal opinion. I'm, as you can probably tell, I'm a bit of an animation buff. I have some very strong capital O opinions about the mediums of animation and the strengths and weaknesses and how they're best used. And I think my problem with this short can best be summed up in one rather brief shot, which happens here. This shot. It's this shot right here. This little scene. Ash has bound her hand with some cloth in order to get the, to bind the wound that she has sustained. She's about to get up, grab her arrows, and go over a hill. Those are the things that are about to happen in the shot. Now, watch how it progresses in real time. Nothing too remarkable, right? It just looked like a shot that happened. You perhaps didn't notice it that much, but let's slow it down and watch it frame by frame. Watch how, for one thing, watch the timing element here. Watch how the environment moves while she remains entirely static. And this, again, is something that they have done in order to approach the look of stop-motion animation, where Ash and the environment will move on different frames in order to not seem like they're completely synchronized, which is a common animation technique. You have to watch the timings of things. If everything is synchronized and moves on the same timings, everything looks kind of stiff and unnatural. But now take a look at how, when she gets up, that. This, look how she moves across the screen here. She's teleporting. That's really all that's happening here. She's teleporting, and there are no in-between frames, except look how the cloak moves. So this is one frame, this is another frame, then that's another frame, right? Her cloak is moving while she is not. And then there's another frame, and the cloak moves. You can see I'm going back and forth while she is not, and then she moves, and then we cut. But this shot right here, this motion, this incredibly stiff motion with so few frames that is so under-rendered, is not very good stop motion. And therein lies my primary problem with this short's aesthetic choice. And again, this is very much from the perspective of, a bit of a nerd who's maybe has too many opinions about this stuff. But nonetheless, if this was a stop motion animation, actually, and they had the kind of budget that this short clearly has, where you have the budget to create so many different environments, so many different characters, so many different scenes, so many different effects. This is clearly a high budget production. This shot would never, ever look like that. They would never have done so few frames. They would never have teleported her across the screen like that. They would have put some stuff in between to smooth out the motion, because the last thing you want from your stop motion animation is for things to look stiff and wooden and unbelievable, which is what this shot does look like. And also when you compare the pacing, right? Here we have a fairly sort of smooth set of shots of Lee Sin and Garen doing their thing, and then Ash is just like, and then she's gone. With these very stiff, wooden, robotic movements that just don't really communicate that much life. And that's the thing that bothers me about this short, is they have used the medium of 3D animation to try and approach the medium of stop-motion animation. But in order to do that, they are intentionally making a stop-motion animation that looks worse than it would have looked if actual stop-motion animators had been told, create this shot, create this short, and make it look as good as possible. They would never have done this. This stiff teleportation move, where, as far as I can tell, they just copy-pasted her model for these two frames. Like, this is the same model as over there with barely any change to her. Even her cloak is the same. And it's just, they would never ever have done that. And once you start looking for those shots, there are things that come up again and again where you kind of go, but this seems to be kind of missing the point of either medium. For instance, this scene right here, where Lee Sin is smashing these columns of wood, these beams of wood. Beams is the word I'm looking for. Look at the smoke or the dust or whatever it is that he generates as he is punching and smashing these things. Especially this shot right here. This dust is not stop motion animation. This is 100% 3D animated smoke. And the quality of motion and the smoothness and the flow of that smoke, as compared to how our boy Lee Sin moves. You can see he just teleports forward here, kind of. But the smoke moves at a smooth 24 frames per second, while Lee Sin does not. And again, this is another example of where they went for the stop motion aesthetic, but in certain aspects, like for instance the lighting is not generated by lamps. And in stop motion animation, a lot of your lighting is going to have to be generated by lamps because you're taking photographs of real objects in the world. And not that they don't do color grading and light correction and all that stuff in the post-production, but you have to have real light, and this is not real light. Like, you cannot do this with lamps. This cannot be done. You have to do a ton of editing and a ton of clever, animation software tricks in order to get the light to do this thing and to fall in those ways on Lee Sin and to play in those ways. And also, another little thing they couldn't resist doing. Boom, animation smear. This is that motion blur that we don't see pretty much anywhere else, but here, because they need the movements and the kicks and the punches to have impact, they do smears. They smear out, they blur, or put a blur on top of things in order to move him around. And again, it's the kind of thing that feels like if you were doing real stop motion, especially like Studio Leica on Paranorman did some fantastic work where they actually created physical models of the smears. Like, if they had done this shot, what they might have done was create a puppet where the leg looks smeared, like where they physically created something that looks smeared in order to create that sensation of motion just for a single frame of a single shot in order to really communicate that impact and speed. But here it's done with a digital effect. And that's kind of the thing. I'm not a purist. I am entirely in favor of mixing media and mixing approaches, but here it seems a bit to me like in chasing the glory of stop motion animation, they have kinda embraced a lot of the flaws of stop motion animation. For instance, the sword instructor here. Look at the way that his fight with Garen and the other trainee plays out. Look at the way he's moving. This completely stiff, completely planted, like he barely moves his legs, and he really does look like a toy soldier, a toy figure that's just kinda jerking around as it's being moved in post. And again, a really good stop motion animator with a budget wouldn't make the shot look like that. Like, that wouldn't be the goal. The goal would be to have him move so fluidly and as fluidly and realistically as possible, and not do stuff like this from frame to frame. I feel like I need some kind of funny music to play over that. And that's kind of my issue with this thing. Now, like I said, everything else about this, the visual storytelling, like the composition, the directing, the cinematography, like this shot right here, just from a cinematography standpoint, and just as a shot, like I want this as a desktop background. This is gorgeous. This is beautiful. But in so many other ways, I feel like the short it doesn't so much get the best of both worlds as much as it is using the world of 3D animation to grab a bunch of the flaws of stop motion animation and kind of import them without really considering, without really thinking about what does the stop motion thing mean? Like, what's the thing that you want from stop motion, and how do you capture that without capturing all the bad stuff, all the flaws, which is the stiff, wooden, kind of unbelievable movement. And I think all of this is completely intentional. I think they wanted it to look this way. I don't think they made a mistake. I don't think they screwed up somehow. I don't think it was like they were sitting around and making dumb decisions because they're bad animators. They're clearly not. This is all intentional. I just don't think it quite works. Anyway, those are my thoughts on Against the Current's Legends Never Die music video by Riot Games. Copyright Riot Games. Please do not sue me or content ID my channel, Riot Games, and also Against the Current. I have not played your music. You can't touch me. I'm invincible. Anyway, if you have some comments, good God, I'm rambling. If you have some comments, leave them down below. If you want to leave a like, I greatly appreciate that. You can also subscribe if these kinds of videos are your thing. I have a bunch more on them on my channel, and they should be popping up on your screen momentarily, I think, in the end cards. And I guess for now, all that's left to say is that my name is TB Skyn, and I shall see you in the next video.